The galaxy had always underestimated humanity. For centuries, humanity was seen as a fleeting, inconsequential species, a young race among ancient civilizations, untested in the furnace of galactic conflict. From the moment they first stumbled into the wider universe, they were dismissed. To the vast, sprawling empires that ruled the stars, humans were little more than a curiosity, brash, undisciplined and full of potential, but unlikely to amount to anything more than an afterthought. The history of the galaxy was written in the language of older species. The Sylphi, with their centuries-long rule, had colonized star systems and shaped the political landscape with an iron fist. The Wai-Tar, a warlike race known for their tactical brilliance, held sway over massive fleets, their legions feared by all. The Che-Ilar traders dominated the vast commerce networks, weaving webs of power that spanned the stars. Humanity, on the other hand, had only just begun to scratch the surface of space exploration. Their ships were small, their technology primitive compared to the vast fleets of the Galactic Council, and yet there was something about humanity, a ferocity, a spark that others did not understand. When humanity first made contact with the wider galactic community, it was clumsy. Their diplomats were mocked, their ships dwarfed by those of the great empires. The first humans to step onto alien worlds were often treated with condescension, their eagerness and naivety exploited. Their questions were met with patronizing smiles. Their technology, though impressive by their own standards, was laughable to those who had mastered space travel long before them. But as time passed, something shifted. Humanity's relentless drive, their insatiable curiosity, and their ability to adapt set them apart. They began to make strides, not just in science and technology, but in the way they thought. The old empires underestimated humanity's ability to innovate. Every setback they faced, every failure, only fueled their desire to push further. Their engineers were inventors, turning the impossible into the routine. Their scientists were problem solvers, always seeking new ways to bend the laws of nature to their will. Where others saw obstacles, humans saw challenges to be overcome. And over the centuries, the Galactic Council began to realize that humanity was not a mere flash in the pan. They were building something more. They were building a future. But that future came with a cost. The more they advanced, the more they encountered the darker side of galactic politics, the ruthlessness of empires that cared little for the smaller being of the smaller species. Human diplomacy often found itself at odds with the power dynamics of the galaxy. Deals were broken. Promises were ignored. And time and again, humanity's desires were brushed aside in favor of the interests of the established powers. This was the beginning of the fracture. For years, humanity swallowed these indignities. They bided their time, hoping that peace and diplomacy would eventually bear fruit. But behind the facade of cooperation, a quiet storm was brewing. There were whispers in the halls of power, among the Council's most influential species, that humanity had grown too bold, too powerful for their own good. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was time to remind them of their place. No one knew the exact moment the tipping point was reached. No one could pinpoint the catalyst for what would come next. But it began, slowly at first, like a spark in the dark. As human technology advanced, so did their expectations. As they gained knowledge, so too did their arrogance. They began to see themselves not as a young, struggling species, but as equals to the ancient empires of the galaxy. And then, one day, the galaxy would learn a truth it had ignored for far too long. Humanity was not a species that would be pushed around forever. They had their breaking point, and it was closer than anyone could imagine. The day that humanity finally snapped would come when no one expected it, and when it did, the galaxy would never be the same again. It began with a single incident, a small mistake, an insult so trivial it should have been forgotten in a day, buried under the tides of interstellar politics. But it wasn't. It couldn't be. Sarah Halley, a seasoned diplomat from the United Human Coalition, had been sent to negotiate a great agreement with the Wai-Tari Paranellan for their ruthlessness. The Wai-Tar, though less technologically advanced than some other species, had mastered the art of war through sheer cunning and discipline. They were a proud people, and pride had always been the most dangerous of weapons. At first, the meeting between Halley and the Wai-Tar representatives seemed to follow the expected script. Diplomatic niceties were exchanged, the formalities adhered to, and then came the discussion of the trade terms. It was a matter of resources, human mining operations on a newly settled world in the fractured rim, and the Wai-Tar wanted to gain favorable terms for their fleet's fuel supply. The negotiations were slow, as they often were, back and forth of posturing and subtle threats. Hallie was used to this, having navigated the complex and often hostile world of galactic diplomacy for years. She kept her cool, carefully reading every gesture, every shift in the Y-TAR's posture. But somewhere in the process, things went awry. It was an offhand comment, a flippant remark from a Y-TAR general, something about humanity's inevitable fall, and how the humans' progress was nothing more than an illusion. It was a statement that stung, that lingered in the air like a bitter taste. Hallie, for the first time in her diplomatic career, felt a flicker of something stronger than professional composure, something raw, something personal. She responded, as she always had, with restraint. A calm counter-argument, a well-constructed explanation of humanity's position. But the Y-TAR general laughed openly, cruelly. "Do you truly think your people will ever rival us, human?" The words were a challenge, the tone dripping with disdain, and it wasn't the first time humanity had been mocked by a superior species, but this time, something broke inside Hallie. She knew it was a mistake even as the words left her mouth. But there was no turning back. "You don't know us," she said, her voice steady but filled with an uncharacteristic steel. "You've underestimated us for too long." The Y-TAR delegation stood silent for a moment. Then, a murmur passed among them. There was a flicker of recognition, as if they had sensed something beneath the surface of her words, a quiet fury, a simmering rage that humanity had long buried under its veneer of diplomacy. But the damage had already been done. The general's smile twisted into something darker, something threatening. "You will learn your place, human," he sneered. "The galaxy is not a place for your kind. You may think you belong among us, but we'll remind you who the true powers are." The meeting ended in chaos. What had been an attempt to secure a trade deal quickly devolved into an international incident. The Y-TAR, insulted and humiliated, broke all talks, sending the entire human delegation home without so much as a diplomatic apology. The news of the altercation spread like wildfire, reverberating across the galactic networks. At first, the United Human Coalition tried to downplay the incident. Diplomatic cables were sent, offers of reconciliation extended, the usual rituals of appeasement followed. But behind closed doors, the anger festered. Human leaders, generals, and politicians gathered, each weighed down by years of frustration and resentment. Humanity had always played by the rules, always held out hope that mutual respect could be fostered, that peace could be forged. But each time they made a step forward, the galaxy pushed them back, mocking their growth, belittling their accomplishments. This wasn't the first time humanity had been wronged, and it wouldn't be the last. But this time something was different. This time there would be no more apologies, no more deference. Humanity had played nice for too long, and now they were done. The decision was made in secret, but the ripples were felt immediately. The United Human Coalition issued a declaration, though no one outside the highest echelons of government knew what was coming. It was a message broadcast across every frequency, every corner of the galaxy. "We are done. No longer will we be your lesser. This is your warning. You will respect us, or we will make you." It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. And for the first time, the galaxy realized that humanity's rage, long buried beneath the weight of diplomacy and restraint, had finally been unleashed. The spark had caught fire, and there was no turning back. The galaxy, for all its size, would soon learn the consequences of underestimating a species that had always been more than it appeared. The first strike came not with the roar of battleships or the flash of exploding stars, but with eerie silence. The galaxy had been lulled into a false sense of security, assuming that humanity's declaration of war was little more than an angry outburst, something to be dismissed, something to wait out. But humanity had learned from the galaxy's indifference. They knew how to strike where it hurt the most, and when the moment came, it would be swift, decisive, and impossible to ignore. The Y-TAR fleet had been on routine patrol, far from their core systems, operating in the outskirts of the galaxy where trade lanes converged. Their warships were known for their sleek designs, powerful weapons, and tactical brilliant ships that had won countless battles, each one adding to the Y-TAR reputation as a military powerhouse. But this time they were not prepared. They had no idea that humanity was watching them from the dark corners of space, studying their every move. The first sign that something was wrong came when their communication systems suddenly went dark. No alarms, no warning, just a dead void where their signals once flowed. The YTAR command ship scrambled to find the source, but by then it was already too late. A single human ship, a nondescript vessel painted in dull grays and blues, emerged from the edges of their sensor range like a ghost. It was nothing special to look at, no grand display of humanity's technological prowess, no flashy weaponry or overtly advanced systems. But the ship was the harbinger of something far more dangerous, a new kind of weapon, one that would change the entire calculus of interstellar war. The YTAR ships tried to retaliate, firing their laser cannons, launching torpedoes, but every strike simply evaporated before reaching its target, swallowed up by an invisible force that seemed to shimmer around the human ship. The YTAR's sensors couldn't lock onto it. Their weapons couldn't touch it. The human ship seemed to exist outside the realm of their understanding. Then, in a flash, it struck. A beam of light, impossibly bright, shot out from the human ship. It wasn't like anything the YTAR had ever seen before. It wasn't a standard energy weapon, it wasn't a missile. It was a weapon of precision, so fine-tuned that it seemed to bypass all the usual defenses. The first YTAR ship was hit. The entire craft didn't just explode, it disintegrated. No debris. No debris as at all. It was as if the ship had never existed, erased from reality itself. Before the YTAR could react, the human ship fired again. And again. Each strike was more devastating than the last, each one a surgical incision into the very heart of the YTAR fleet. The YTAR scrambled to organize a defense to launch their countermeasures. But they were playing catch-up. The humans had anticipated every move, outsmarting them at every turn. And then, in the space of a single, agonizing hour, the YTAR fleet was gone. Hundreds of ships, once so proud and invincible, were reduced to nothing. Not a single YTAR ship had fired a successful shot. The galaxy's most feared military force, the very symbol of strength, was now just a memory. The human vessel, without so much as a scratch, turned and disappeared back into the void, leaving no trace of its passing. Back on Earth, in the heart of the United Human Coalition, there was no celebration, no victory parades. The leaders of humanity knew that what they had just unleashed would change everything. It wasn't just a victory in battle. It was a message, a warning to anyone who thought humanity could be dismissed, belittled, or underestimated. But even as they basked in the crushing success of the strike, there was an undeniable weight to the silence that followed. The galaxy had been watching. The message had been sent, but now, the real challenge began. Humanity had taken its first step toward reshaping the balance of power in the galaxy, but what would the other empires do in response? The YTAR had been dealt with, but how long before the others, those who saw the humans as little more than pests, would come to take their turn? The war, it seemed, had only just begun. For humanity, the question was no longer whether they could survive the coming storm. It was whether they could force the galaxy to finally respect them, and what they were willing to do to make it happen. The galaxy's response to the decimation of the YTAR fleet was swift and ruthless, though initially there was a sense of disbelief. The Galactic Council had long dismissed humanity as a mere annoyance, a species whose small, scattered systems were no match for the forces of established empires. But that arrogance, that presumption of superiority, had blinded them. They had ignored the warnings, misjudged the resolve of the humans, and now they were paying the price. In the immediate aftermath of the attack, representatives from the Council's oldest and most powerful species scrambled to make sense of the devastation. The YTAR were not just a military force, they were a symbol, an anchor of power in a galaxy that thrived on the assumption that the strongest fleets would always reign supreme. With their annihilation, the very foundation of galactic balance had been shattered. The Council had no choice but to act. The K'Tari were the first to respond. A species of towering reptilian beings, the K'Tari had long been known for their calculating minds and deadly fleets. The K'Tari military apparatus was vast, one of the largest in the galaxy. But even as they mobilized, they remained cautious. The K'Tari understood the importance of fear and intimidation, and they had no desire to repeat the YTAR's mistake of underestimating their enemy. They sent emissaries to Earth, attempting to open channels of communication, hoping to avoid further bloodshed. They sought to understand what the humans had done, how they had achieved the impossible. Their attempts at diplomacy were met with disdain. The humans had made their point. They were no longer the submissive species begging for a seat at the table. Their message had been clear, but the K-Tari still could not grasp its full weight. "We respect strength," they said. "We believe in the balance of power." But the humans had already discarded that philosophy. To them, the balance of power wasn't something to be maintained, it was something to be seized. There would be no negotiation, no appeasement. When the K-Tari finally decided to take matters into their own hands, they came in force. Their fleets descended on human colonies along the outer rim, bringing with them the full might of their war machines. They launched an attack, a show of overwhelming power meant to break the back of humanity's defiance. The humans, however, were prepared. They had expected retaliation, and they had planned accordingly. The battle was swift, brutal, and devastating for both sides. The K-Tari brought hundreds of warships, but their advanced weapons proved ineffective against the humans' new defenses. Humanity had perfected the Aegis Field, a shield capable of absorbing and redirecting all forms of energy-based weapons. Every missile, every laser blast, every cannon shot from the K-Tari fleet was rendered useless, swallowed by the field as though it was never there. The humans fought not with brute force, but with precision. Their fleet, though smaller than the K-Tari's, moved with deadly purpose. They had learned from the Y-Tar's defeat this time there would be no waste, no distractions. They struck at the heart of the K-Tari fleet, targeting their command ships, disabling their communication systems, and cutting off their ability to coordinate. The K-Tari, once so confident in their superiority, were forced to retreat. But this time, it wasn't the end of the story. The humans had sent a clear message: we will not be intimidated. No longer were they the weak, the fledgling species eager to please. They were now a force to be reckoned with. But the K-Tari were not a species that would retreat without planning their own vengeance. In the wake of the defeat, the Galactic Council convened. It was clear that the humans were not the only species capable of destruction. They had proven that. But the other powers were now faced with a terrifying truth. The humans had not only defeated the Y-Tar and K-Tari, they had shown that they were capable of creating technology far beyond the grasp of even the most advanced civilizations. The question was no longer whether humanity would be a threat, it was how to contain them. How to regain control of the galaxy's power dynamics. But the more the Council schemed, the more they misunderstood the true nature of the humans. They believed the humans wanted to be part of the galactic system. They believed the humans could be reasoned with, could be kept in check through alliances and diplomacy. But humanity's objectives had changed. They no longer sought approval or a place in the galactic fold. They sought respect, and they were willing to go to any lengths to make the galaxy understand just how far they had come. In the aftermath of the K-Tari's failure, the remaining empires began to look inward. They began to build their own fleets, their own defenses, and they began to look at humanity not as a temporary annoyance, but as a permanent threat. But for the first time in history, a new power had emerged from the shadows, a power that would not be ignored, a power that would demand its place among the stars. The war was no longer a matter of whether humanity would survive, it was a question of how much the galaxy would change before they were through. As the galaxy's great powers scrambled to contain humanity's sudden rise, the once unified front began to fracture. The Y-Tar, broken but not defeated, had called for retaliation. The K-Tari, humiliated on their own turf, vowed to teach humanity a lesson they would never forget. But among the older species, there was a growing realization that the situation was far more complicated than they had initially thought. Humanity's technological leap had caught them all off guard, and their willingness to fight, to push back against the entrenched powers, had shifted the balance of the galaxy in ways no one had anticipated. In a dimly lit chamber on the Pluravian homeworld, the leaders of the galaxy's remaining superpowers met in secret. The Pluravians, known for their intelligence, diplomacy, and cultural sophistication, were eager to find a peaceful solution. They had seen the potential for human growth, for the new kind of civilization they could become, and they were determined to prevent further bloodshed. But there was a growing sense among the Pluravian diplomats that humanity had crossed a line, something irreparable had been broken. They no longer saw a species that could be reasoned with, but a force that had tasted power and now sought more. "We cannot simply let them run rampant," said one of the Krolny diplomats, their voice heavy with the weight of their ancient wisdom. The Krolny had seen their fair share of empires rise and fall, and they were deeply wary of the new power emerging at the edge of the galaxy. They are dangerous. They will only grow more so. The longer we wait, the more they will consolidate their power. The Pluravians nodded, but there was hesitation in their eyes. We could engage them in dialogue, one suggested. We could offer an olive branch, a chance for them to join the Galactic Council as equals. But the K'Tari general, whose people had suffered most in the recent conflict, scoffed. Join as equals? They don't want to join. They want to dominate. Can't you see it? They have no interest in becoming part of the system. They want to remake it in their own image. It was then that a chilling thought rippled through the council. Humanity's sudden and violent ascent was not the work of a species seeking to survive, it was the work of a species that was seeking to control. And what terrified the other empires was the realization that humanity was capable of achieving that control, not just through force but through sheer ingenuity. They had already demonstrated a mastery of advanced technologies, and it was becoming clear that the humans were only getting started. The Pluravians, K'Tari, Y'Tar, and Krolny all began to turn their eyes inward, consolidating their own forces, readying their fleets, and fortifying their defenses. But they could not ignore the growing threat that humanity represented. Every time they thought they had found an edge and advantage in diplomacy, in military might, they were reminded that the humans were always one step ahead. They had already learned how to harness the power of the Aegis field, and rumors of other, even more devastating weapons began to swirl. The galaxy's ancient empires, once so sure of their invulnerability, were now gripped by the fear that humanity's potential was limitless. Meanwhile, on Earth, the United Human Coalition was taking advantage of every second of the confusion. They had built alliances with smaller, less established species, drawing them into their orbit. The coalition offered protection, trade, and technology, all while carefully observing the movements of the larger powers. Every move was calculated, each step taken with the precision of a species that had learned to adapt quickly, to use every opportunity to its advantage. But the humans were not simply preparing for the inevitable next battle. They were preparing to reshape the galaxy in their image. The coalition began expanding its fleets, utilizing their growing technological edge to build warships unlike anything the galaxy had seen. The ships were designed not just for battle, but for survival, equipped with energy fields that could withstand even the most advanced enemy weapons, engines capable of reaching unthinkable speeds, and weapons that could carve through entire fleets with pinpoint accuracy. Despite the Council's attempts to unify against the humans, there was no real cohesion. The older species had spent so long at the top of the galactic food chain that they had forgotten what it meant to fight from the ground up, to innovate under pressure. Humanity, in contrast, had been forced to survive on the fringes of galactic society, to adapt or perish, and now their ingenuity and relentless determination had created a force so formidable that the very fabric of the galaxy's power structure was beginning to unravel. Diplomatic missions from the larger empires continued, but they grew increasingly desperate. The K'Tari sent emissaries to Earth with threats of total war. The Y'Tar, seeking vengeance for their destroyed fleets, tried to rally allies. The Pluravians, ever the diplomats, proposed compromises, new treaties, new alliances, but each time, the humans rejected them. Their message was simple. We don't want to negotiate anymore. We want to be heard. The galaxy, in turn, became fractured. The very system that had maintained order for millennia was now being challenged by the force of a species that had once been the galaxy's underdog. Humanity's refusal to bend, their determination to stand firm in the face of all opposition, was shaking the foundations of the old order. The war was not over. Far from it. But the tides were changing, and no one could deny that humanity was on the cusp of becoming something far more than the galaxy had ever expected. The breaking point came when the Pluravians, weary from endless diplomacy, finally proposed a radical solution: a galactic summit, a gathering of all the major powers to meet in neutral space and discuss humanity's future. The summit was a last-ditch effort to avoid open war, to create an agreement that could somehow accommodate the humans within the galaxy's existing power structure. It was a gamble, one that the Pluravians themselves knew might fail, but it was their final hope for peace. The summit was held in a region of space known as the Cygnus Nebula, a sprawling, colorful expanse of gas and dust that was neutral ground, free from the influence of any single empire. Representatives from every major faction in the galaxy arrived: K'Tari, Y'Tar, Pluravians, Krolny, and even some of the smaller species that had fallen under humanity's growing influence. The United Human Coalition was represented by their new Supreme Chancellor, Emily Voss, a woman who had risen from the ashes of Earth's fractured political landscape to become the face of humanity's new power. Voss's reputation preceded her. She was known for her sharp mind, her calm demeanor in the face of overwhelming pressure, and her ruthless pragmatism. She was not there to make friends. She was there to ensure humanity's survival, and, if necessary, to force the galaxy to respect them on their terms. The leaders of the galaxy's old powers were nervous, despite the grand setting and the formalities of diplomacy. The K'Tari arrived first, their ships cutting through the nebula like predatory birds. The Ytar followed shortly after, their warships still bristling with the scars of their defeat. The Pluravians, who had long prided themselves on their intellect and finesse, appeared as calm as ever, though there was an unmistakable tension in their eyes. Everyone knew the stakes were high, but no one knew how far the humans were willing to go. When Voss arrived, flanked by her security detail and a fleet of human warships in orbit above the summit station, the room fell into an uncomfortable silence. The other delegates had not expected such a show of strength, but Voss made no attempt to downplay it. She had come not just as a representative of her people, but as a force to be reckoned with. She took her seat at the head of the table, her expression unreadable, and the others followed suit. The opening remarks were brief. The Pluravians, as expected, sought to open with a message of peace. They spoke of reconciliation, of finding common ground. "The galaxy has endured many trials," said the Pluravian envoy, his voice smooth and soothing. "We are not here to fight, but to build a future together. Humanity has a place in our galaxy, let us find it together." Voss listened, her expression still. "Humanity doesn't need a place," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "We've been carving our own place for centuries. The real question is whether the galaxy is ready for us to lead." The room went silent. The K'Tari general, his massive frame looming over the table, growled in response. "You're mad if you think we'll just let you walk in and take over," he spat. "We will not bow to your arrogance. You cannot hope to control the galaxy." Voss did not flinch. "You're right. I don't want to control the galaxy. I want to change it. I want it to evolve. Humanity is not like your empires. We don't seek to rule through fear or endless domination, but we will not be pushed around anymore." Her words hung in the air like a challenge. For the first time, the other leaders saw the full extent of humanity's resolve. The Ytar, still reeling from their loss, spoke next, but their words were no more conciliatory. "You think we've forgotten your treachery, human? You think the galaxy will let you tear down everything we've built?" Voss's eyes narrowed, but her tone remained calm. "You've built your empires on fear and oppression. We are offering something different. A galaxy that works for everyone. A galaxy where all species have a chance to thrive, not just the powerful few." Her words struck at the heart of what had always driven the galaxy's great powers, their belief in a system that was designed to maintain the status quo. The old empires had prospered by exploiting their resources and keeping the weaker species in check. Humanity's rise represented not just a threat to their military dominance, but to their entire way of life. The summit grew increasingly tense, and while the Pluravians tried to mediate, it was clear that no compromise was going to satisfy the humans. Their strength in the field, their technological advancements, and their unwavering determination had made one thing crystal clear. Humanity was no longer asking for a seat at the table. They were demanding one. Hours passed, and the discussions became more heated, but no resolution was reached. Each faction remained entrenched in its position. The humans were unwilling to accept anything less than equality, while the older species could not fathom a universe where they were not the dominant powers. It became apparent that diplomacy, for all its fine words, was not going to resolve this. As the summit ended in stalemate, the delegates began to disperse, but Voss's final words left an indelible mark on everyone in the room. "This is your last chance. We won't beg for your approval any longer. The next time we meet, it will be under different circumstances." With that, she turned and walked out, leaving the galaxy's old powers to face the undeniable truth. Humanity was no longer an upstart species to be ignored or humored. They were a force that could no longer be contained, and the time for talk was quickly running out. The days following the summit were marked by uneasy silence. The great powers of the galaxy, once so confident in their unchallenged dominance, now found themselves in a precarious position. Humanity had not only survived their first confrontation with the galaxy's might, but had emerged as a force capable of reshaping the very structure of power. In the wake of Voss's unyielding declaration, a cold realization set in among the old empires. They were no longer the undisputed rulers of the stars. The galaxy had changed. and they had not been part of the transformation. At first, there was a flurry of diplomatic responses, but none were substantial. The Pluravians, though they maintained a veneer of politeness, secretly began to rally their closest allies in a bid to create a counterforce to humanity's growing military might. The K'Tari, still stinging from their humiliating defeat, called for a full-scale invasion of human space, hoping to crush the United Human Coalition before their technological edge became too overwhelming. The Waitar, though battered, made threats of their own, publicly vowing to avenge their lost fleets. But behind closed doors, a different conversation was taking place. They were not just discussing humanity's defiance, they were debating how to survive it. The first sign that the war was truly upon them came from the K'Tari. Their fleets moved, large and deliberate, towards human space, their ships already bristling with weaponry. But this time the humans were prepared. The K'Tari expected to catch them off guard, to find the human fleet scattered, their colonies vulnerable. They could not have been more wrong. As the K'Tari approached the border of human-controlled space, they were greeted by a wall of light, a massive defensive network powered by the same Aegis field that had shielded humanity's ships from the K'Tari's devastating firepower in their earlier conflict. The humans had expanded the network, building hundreds of new stations that acted as both shields and launch points for their increasingly formidable fleet. The K'Tari hesitated, unwilling to risk losing more ships in another failed attempt to breach the defenses. Instead, they launched a series of smaller, tactical raids, probing for weaknesses. But each time they tested the human defenses, they were repelled. The humans had not only learned from their past battles but had anticipated the moves of their enemies. They countered every strategy with precision and foresight, striking back with devastating efficiency. In the middle of these skirmishes, Emily Voss, ever the strategist, knew that the time had come to act. Humanity could no longer afford to be reactive. They had to be bold. The United Human Churn issued a direct ultimatum to the Galactic Council: surrender control of the galaxy's central centers to humanity or face the consequences. The human fleet, now bolstered by alliances with smaller species, had grown powerful enough to challenge even the largest empires. No longer confined to the fringes, humanity was poised to take control of vital trade routes, energy sources, and military strongholds. If the old empires were going to survive, they would have to submit to the new order. In the council chambers, the leaders of the galaxy's ancient powers convened once more. But this time, there was no room for negotiation. The stakes had escalated beyond the possibility of diplomacy. Humanity's growing strength had rendered their attempts at peace futile. The K'Tari, who had once been so sure of their own supremacy, now spoke in a different tone, one of reluctant admiration for the humans' tenacity and cunning. The Waitar, defeated and humiliated, were desperate for revenge, but they, too, saw the writing on the wall. The Pluravians, who had tried so hard to mediate peace, found themselves cornered. They were outmatched both in military might and political influence. But the Pluravians were not without options. They knew they couldn't defeat humanity directly, but they were masters of alliances, of subtlety. They began to make secret overtures to the other powers, suggesting that the only way to avoid total destruction was to band together against the human threat. But even among the galaxy's older empires, there were fractures. The K'Tar and Waitar, their hatred for each other deeply rooted, could not come to a consensus. The Kralni, the last remaining neutral power, refused to get involved, unwilling to choose sides in what they saw as a conflict between titans. As the days turned into weeks, the human fleets advanced further into contested space, gaining ground, claiming new territories, and forcing older species to either yield or be overwhelmed. With each victory, the United Human Coalition grew bolder. Humanity was not simply fighting for survival anymore, they were fighting for their place as a new power in the galaxy. The question that hung in the air, unanswered, was not whether they would win. It was how much the galaxy would change before it finally bent to their will. The old empires, for all their might, could not shake the feeling that they were living in the shadow of something they could not control. The war was no longer just about weapons or strategies, it was about an idea, an ideology that humanity had cultivated from the ashes of their past. They weren't just challenging the old powers, they were reimagining the very nature of the galaxy itself. And as the conflict raged on, the universe would soon realize the cost of underestimating a species that had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The day humanity had snapped would be remembered as the day the galaxy was forced to reckon with a new, unstoppable force.